The first contact in the frost. Commander Jenna Reynolds stood at the observation window of Research Station Omega, watching Antarctica's perpetual twilight paint the ice sheets in shades of purple and blue. The thermometer read -60 degrees Celsius, a warm day by local standards. 20 years of military service hadn't prepared her for commanding a research station at the bottom of the world, but the military's interest in extreme environment survival techniques had brought her here. The first sign that something was wrong came from Dr. Marcus Turner, their atmospheric scientist. "Commander, you need to see this," his voice crackled over the intercom. "The upper atmosphere readings are off the charts." Reynolds made her way to the monitoring station, her boots echoing through the metal corridors. The station's skeleton crew of 15, a mix of military personnel and civilian scientists, had been tracking unusual atmospheric disturbances for the past week. But nothing like this. "Look at these energy signatures," Turner pointed to his screen, his breath visible in the cold air of the monitoring room. "They're organized. Structured. This isn't natural." Before Reynolds could respond, the station's communications officer, Lieutenant James Wilson, burst through the door. "Commander, we're picking up something massive on our long-range scanners. Multiple objects, descending through the atmosphere." The objects turned out to be ships, massive, crystalline structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They descended through the storm-darkened sky with an otherworldly grace that made Reynolds' combat-trained instincts scream in warning. "Get me a secure line to command," Reynolds ordered, but Wilson shook his head. "All communications are dead. Whatever they are, they're generating some kind of interference field." The first alien transmission came as a burst of light that transformed into holographic figures in the middle of the station's main operations room. The creatures, the Nixians, as they would later call themselves, stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in what appeared to be living metal armor. "This world has been chosen for integration into the Nixian collective," the lead figure announced in perfect English, clearly using some form of universal translator. "Your environmental conditions have been deemed suitable for conversion. Resistance is unnecessary." Reynolds stood her ground, years of combat experience keeping her voice steady. "This facility is under the protection of the Earth Defense Forces. We request immediate dialogue with your leadership." The Nixians' response was dismissive. "Your primitive military designations are irrelevant. This location has been selected as an initial conversion point due to its minimal population density. You will submit to processing or face immediate termination." What the Nixians couldn't understand, was that they had just made their first crucial mistake. They had chosen to land in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, assuming that the sparse population meant easy conquest. They didn't realize they were facing humans who had specifically trained to survive and fight in conditions that would kill most living things. Reynolds gave a subtle hand signal to her team. Years of drilling for emergency scenarios kicked in as her people quietly moved to their designated positions. The Nixians, focused on their demands and seemingly confident in their technological superiority, failed to notice. "Your species' thermal signatures indicate biological functions incompatible with resistance in these conditions," the Nixian continued. "Submit now." Reynolds allowed herself a small smile. "You're right about one thing," she said. "These conditions are brutal. But there's something you should know about humans in brutal conditions." She pressed a button on her wrist controller, and every heating system in the station shut down simultaneously. The temperature, already cold by human standards, began to plummet. "We don't just survive them. We learn to use them." The Nixians' reaction was immediate and revealing. Their armor, seemingly alive, began to contract and shift, trying to compensate for the rapid temperature change. Their holographic projections flickered. "This is your final warning," the lead Nixian announced, but Reynolds could hear something new in the artificial translation: uncertainty. "No," Reynolds replied, watching frost patterns spread across the walls. "This is yours. Welcome to Antarctica." As the temperature continued to drop, Reynolds and her team deployed their cold weather gear, equipment they trained with daily. The Nixians, for all their advanced technology, began to show signs of distress. Their living metal armor, designed for space travel and combat, wasn't adapted for extreme cold. Status report, Reynolds commanded over their secured local frequency. "They're pulling back," Commander Wilson reported. "Their energy signatures are becoming erratic. Whatever their technology is, it doesn't like the cold." "Begin Operation Snowblind," Reynolds ordered. "Let's show our visitors why humans are still here after millions of years of ice ages." The battle for Earth was about to begin, and humanity's first line of defense was a handful of people who had mastered survival in one of the planet's most extreme environments. The Nixians were about to learn that sometimes, the most primitive-seeming adaptations were the most effective. As the alien ships hovering above the station began to show signs of ice formation on their hulls, Reynolds knew they had found their edge. The war wouldn't be won with matching technology, it would be won with the skills humans had spent millennia developing, the ability to adapt, survive, and turn hostile environments into advantages. The first battle for Earth would be fought in the frost, and the invaders had no idea what they were truly facing. Cold calculations. The Nixian ships hung in the darkening Antarctic sky like obsidian shards, their surfaces now glazed with a layer of frost. Inside Research Station Omega, Dr. Turner studied the thermal imaging displays with growing excitement. "Commander Reynolds, look at these readings," he called out, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Their hull temperature is dropping faster than the ambient air. Whatever their technology is, it's actually working against them in this climate." Reynolds nodded, watching the alien vessels through thermal goggles. The Nixians had retreated to their ships after their disastrous first contact, but they hadn't left. Instead, they seemed to be regrouping, probably too proud or too committed to their invasion plans to admit their miscalculation. "Their armor is some kind of reactive metal," Technical Sergeant Kai Patel observed, analyzing the data from their brief encounter. "It's constantly trying to maintain optimal conditions for their biology, but that means it's fighting a losing battle against the cold. The energy expenditure must be enormous." The station's small crew had transformed their research facility into an improper command center. They might be cut off from the outside world, but they weren't helpless. Every member of the team had been chosen for their ability to think creatively in extreme conditions. "What's our status?" Reynolds asked, turning to Lieutenant Wilson. "We've activated the emergency protocols. All non-essential systems are dark, and we're running on minimal power to mask our heat signature. The backup generators are buried deep enough in the ice to be undetectable." Wilson paused, checking his tablet. "The good news is, we've managed to get a message out using the old Morse code systems through the ice. Command knows we're here, and they know what we're facing." Reynolds allowed herself a grim smile. The Nixians had chosen this location thinking they'd found an easy first target. Instead, they'd landed right on top of one of humanity's most advanced cold-weather research and training facilities. "Show me the station schematics," she ordered, and a holographic map flickered to life on the central table. "We've got something they don't, intimate knowledge of how to use this environment as a weapon." The team gathered around the display as Reynolds outlined her plan. The station had been built with multiple layers of protection against the cold, but those same systems could be reversed. They had already turned off the heating to make the facility less visible to thermal scanning, but that was just the beginning. "Dr. Turner, what about your experimental thermal masking technology?" Reynolds asked. The scientist nodded eagerly. "The prototypes are ready. We developed them to help wildlife researchers approach animals without disrupting them with our heat signatures. They should work even better against these aliens, they seem even more sensitive to thermal variations than we expected." "Perfect. Lieutenant Wilson, what about the ice tunnels?" "All access points are secure, Commander. We've mapped every crevasse and cavity within a 10-kilometer radius. If we need to move, we can do it without being detected." The station shuddered as something impacted the ice nearby. The Nixians were testing the ground, probably looking for a way to establish a permanent foothold. They didn't realize that the ice itself was a constantly moving, living thing, full of dangers for those who didn't understand it. "They're going to try to establish a base," Reynolds said, watching new thermal blooms appear on their sensors. "They think they can use their technology to create a controllable environment. But they don't understand what they're dealing with." Patel pointed to several spots on the map where the alien ships were concentrating their energy beams. "They're trying to melt through the ice sheet. But look at these readings, they're having to expend massive amounts of energy just to maintain their own systems in this cold. They can't sustain this for long." Reynolds studied the pattern of alien activity. The Nixians were behaving exactly as she had hoped, like an technologically superior force that had never faced an environment they couldn't simply overpower. They were about to learn that nature didn't care about technological superiority. "Begin Phase 2, she ordered. "Dr. Turner, deploy your thermal masking devices. Sergeant Patel, prepare the ice charges. Lieutenant Wilson, get our special equipment ready. We're going to give them a proper Antarctic welcome." The team moved with practiced efficiency, donning their advanced cold weather gear. The suits were the product of years of research and development, designed to allow humans to operate in the most extreme conditions Earth could produce. They might look primitive compared to the Nixians' living metal armor, but they were perfectly adapted to their environment. "Commander," Turner called out, his voice tense. "They're launching something from their ships." Dozens of small objects, spreading out across the ice. Reynolds watched through the observation window as metallic spheres descended from the alien vessels, burrowing into the snow. "They're trying to establish a sensor network," she realized. "They want to map the terrain. But they don't know about the crevasses," Wilson added with a knowing look. "Or the ice movements." "Exactly," Reynolds smiled. "Let them waste their resources. Nature will do half our work for us." The team watched as several of the alien sensors disappeared into hidden crevasses. Others, planted on seemingly solid ice, began to drift as the glacier continued its eternal movement. The Nixians' frustration was almost palpable as they launched more and more sensors, trying to establish a stable monitoring grid in an environment that refused to remain static. "They still think they're fighting us," Patel observed. "They haven't figured out that their real enemy is the ice itself." Reynolds checked her watch. The sun would soon set completely, plunging them into the long Antarctic night. For the Nixians, it would make things even worse. The temperature would drop another 30 degrees, and their energy expenditure would increase proportionally. "Get ready," she ordered. "When their systems are stretched to the breaking point trying to cope with the night's cold, we'll show them why humans are still here after every ice age Earth has thrown at us." As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, the alien ship's energy signatures began to fluctuate more dramatically. The Nixians had started this invasion thinking they were the superior force. They were about to learn that sometimes, superiority wasn't about having the most advanced technology, it was about understanding and adapting to your environment. The real battle was about to begin, and Reynolds' team was ready. They had trained for years to fight in conditions that would kill most humans. Against aliens who couldn't handle the cold. It was almost unfair. Almost. Operation Whitewash. The Antarctic night had fully descended, bringing with it temperatures that would freeze exposed flesh in seconds. Inside their emergency command center, Commander Reynolds and her team watched as the Nixian ship's energy signatures grew increasingly erratic. "Look at these power fluctuations," Patel said, pointing to his display. "They're burning through their energy reserves just trying to maintain basic functions. Their living metal armor wasn't designed for this kind of sustained cold." Reynolds studied the tactical display, where the alien vessels now showed clear signs of stress. Ice had formed along their hull seams, and their previously smooth surfaces were becoming distorted as the extreme cold affected their biomechanical systems. "Time to move," Reynolds announced. "Dr. Turner, are the thermal decoys ready? Turner nodded, holding up a handful of small devices that looked like simple flares. These will generate heat signatures identical to human biological patterns. The Nixians won't be able to distinguish them from real people. The plan was elegantly simple. While the aliens struggled with the cold, the station's crew would use their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They had spent years mapping every crevasse, every ice cave, and every natural formation in the area. Team 1, move out, Reynolds ordered. Wilson led 3 other crew members through the station's lower access tunnel, each carrying a pack of Turner's thermal decoys. They would plant them in a pattern designed to draw the Nixians' attention away from the station's actual location. Team 2, prepare for Phase 2, Reynolds continued. She, Turner, and Patel would lead the main offensive once the aliens took the bait. Their weapons were simple but effective, modified ice-penetrating charges originally designed for geological research. The first sign that their plan was working came when the alien ships began to move, their sensors detecting what appeared to be human heat signatures scattered across the ice field. The Nixians, still thinking in terms of conventional warfare, dispatched ground forces to investigate. They're deploying their troops, Wilson's voice crackled over the secure comm, just as we predicted. Their armor is struggling with the temperature, they're moving slowly, awkwardly. Reynolds watched through her thermal goggles as the alien soldiers emerged from their ships. The Nixians' supposedly superior armor, which had looked so impressive during their first contact, now worked against them. The living metal contracted in the extreme cold, limiting their movement and draining their power reserves. Now, Reynolds commanded. Team 1 activated the thermal decoys in sequence, creating the illusion of human forces retreating across the ice field. The Nixians took the bait, pursuing what they thought were fleeing defenders. They're approaching the first target zone, Patel reported. Charges are armed and ready. Reynolds waited until the alien forces had moved into position, then gave the signal. The ice charges detonated in sequence, not to attack the Nixians directly, but to destabilize the ice beneath them. The aliens, unfamiliar with the treacherous nature of glacier ice, had no time to react as the ground began to shift and crack beneath their feet. Multiple contacts down, Wilson reported with satisfaction. Their armor's trying to compensate for the sudden movement, but it's drawing too much power in this cold. The Nixian response was immediate but uncoordinated. Their ships attempted to provide support, firing energy weapons at the ice field, but this only made things worse. The sudden heat differentials created new stress patterns in the ice, leading to more fractures and shifts. They still don't understand, Turner observed, watching the chaos unfold. Every action they take based on their advanced technology just makes their situation worse. Reynolds nodded grimly. That's because they're fighting the wrong enemy. They think they're fighting us, but they're really fighting the environment. And that's a battle they can't win, not here, not without understanding what they're dealing with. The next phase of their plan began as Team 2 moved into position. Using their knowledge of the ice caves and crevasses, they began to plant Turner's larger thermal devices, ones designed not to lure, but to disrupt. These will create rapid temperature fluctuations, Turner explained as they worked. Their armor seems to rely on maintaining stable conditions. Let's see how it handles constant environmental changes. The effects were dramatic. As the devices activated, creating alternating zones of extreme heat and cold, the Nixian forces began to falter. Their living metal armor, desperately trying to adapt to the rapidly changing conditions, began to malfunction. Commander, Wilson's voice came urgently over the comm, the alien ships, they're pulling back. Their power signatures are critical. Reynolds watched as the massive vessels began to ascend, their surfaces now completely covered in ice. The Nixians had finally realized that their technological superiority meant nothing in an environment they couldn't control or understand. But the human forces weren't done yet. As the ships retreated, Reynolds initiated the final phase of Operation Whitewash. Hidden devices planted earlier began to emit focused electromagnetic pulses, designed by Turner to interfere with the specific frequency patterns they had observed in Nixian technology. Direct hit. Patel exclaimed as one of the smaller alien vessels lost power completely, its systems overwhelmed by the combination of electromagnetic disruption and extreme cold. The ship crashed into the ice field, its living metal hull shattering in the frigid air. "Secure that wreckage," Reynolds ordered. "That's our first piece of captured alien technology, and I want to know everything about it." As her team moved to secure the crash site, Reynolds allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Nixians had arrived expecting to find a primitive species ripe for conquest. Instead, they had encountered humans who had learned to turn one of Earth's most hostile environments into a weapon. The battle wasn't over. The remaining alien ships still hovered at high altitude, presumably reporting back to their fleet. But they had learned a crucial lesson: on Earth, technological superiority wasn't everything. Sometimes, the ability to adapt and survive in extreme conditions was the greatest weapon of all. Thermal weakness. The captured Nixian vessel lay half-buried in the Antarctic ice, its once sleek hull now resembling shattered obsidian. Dr. Turner worked feverishly in the makeshift research lab they'd established around the wreckage, his instruments revealing secrets about their alien adversaries with each new scan. "Commander Reynolds," he called out, his voice tight with excitement. "You need to see this. The alien armor, it's not just technology. It's a complex thermal regulation system tied directly to their biology." Reynolds approached the holographic display where Turner had mapped the intricate workings of the Nixian biotech. The visualization showed layers of living metal intertwined with what appeared to be organic tissue. "They're not wearing their armor," Patel realized, studying the scans. "They're symbiotically linked to it. It's part of them." "Exactly," Turner confirmed. "And that's why they're so vulnerable to extreme temperature changes. Their entire species has evolved to rely on this technology for environmental adaptation. But it has a critical flaw: it requires enormous energy to maintain homeostasis in extreme conditions." Reynolds contemplated this revelation. "So when we force their armor to adapt to rapid temperature changes, we're not just disrupting their technology," Turner finished. "We're attacking their basic life support system." The discovery changed everything. What had started as a defensive action against an alien invasion had revealed a fundamental weakness in their seemingly invincible enemies. The Nixians weren't just struggling with Earth's extreme environment, they were physiologically incapable of handling it without their technology. "Lieutenant Wilson," Reynolds called over the comm, "what's the status of our visitors?" "The remaining ships are maintaining high altitude, Commander. They're staying above the worst of the temperature effects, but they're still taking damage. The ice buildup on their hulls is visible even from here." Reynolds turned to Patel. "How are our new thermal weapons coming along?" The technical sergeant gestured to a row of modified devices spread across his workbench. "Using Dr. Turner's research, we've adapted our electromagnetic pulse generators to target the specific frequencies their thermal regulation systems use. One hit should overload their entire biological-technological interface." "And the delivery system?" Patel smiled. "That's the beautiful part. We're using their own technology against them. The living metal from the crashed ship. It responds to thermal changes. We can use that to guide our weapons right to them." The station's warning systems suddenly blared to life. "Multiple contacts." Wilson's voice crackled over the comm, "They're launching some kind of pods, hundreds of them." Reynolds rushed to the observation window. The sky was filled with streaking lights as the Nixian ships deployed what looked like mechanical seeds. As they hit the ice, they began to burrow, releasing pulses of energy that melted the surrounding snow. "They're trying to terraform," Turner realized, checking his instruments. "They're attempting to create a controlled environment bubble. If they can't adapt to our world, they'll try to adapt our world to them," Reynolds finished grimly. "Not on my watch. Initialize Operation Deep Freeze. The human forces had prepared for this possibility. While studying the Nixian wreckage, they had discovered that the aliens' terraforming technology relied on maintaining precise thermal gradients. Any significant disruption would cascade through their entire system. Activating cryocharges now, Patel reported. Deep beneath the ice, specially designed devices began to pump supercooled air through the glacier's natural fault lines. The effect was immediate. The Nixian terraforming pods began to malfunction as their carefully calculated thermal equations were thrown into chaos. Their whole network is destabilizing, Turner reported, watching the readings. The temperature differential is too extreme for their systems to compensate. The aliens responded with increased aggression, their ships descending to launch energy weapons at the human facility. But the station's defenses, designed to withstand Antarctica's worst storms, held firm. More importantly, each blast of alien energy was met with a precisely calculated thermal countermeasure. They still don't understand, Reynolds observed. They think they can overpower the cold with pure energy, but they're just making themselves more vulnerable. As if to prove her point, one of the Nixian ships suddenly lurched in the air, its hull cracking as supercooled air from the human countermeasures met its overheating weapons systems. The thermal shock was too much for the living metal to handle. Now, Reynolds ordered. Launch the modified EMPs. Patel activated their new weapons, and pulses of precisely tuned energy shot toward the alien vessels. The effects were devastating. The Nixians' biological-technological interface, already strained by the extreme cold, completely collapsed under the targeted attack. Direct hits on all targets, Wilson reported. Their ships are losing power, their ground forces are immobilized. Commander, I think we've done it. But Reynolds knew better than to celebrate too soon. This was just one battle in what would likely be a longer war. The remaining Nixian ships were retreating, but they would return, perhaps with new adaptations, new strategies. Secure all the disabled alien tech, she ordered. Dr. Turner, I want every piece of data you can salvage from their systems. The next time they come, they'll be ready for our cold weather tactics. But we'll be ready too, Turner replied, already analyzing new data streams from the battlefield. And now we know their greatest weakness. They've become so dependent on their living metal technology that they've forgotten how to truly adapt. Reynolds nodded, watching the alien ships disappear into the dark Antarctic sky. Humanity had won this round not through superior technology, but through understanding and exploiting the very environment their enemies had dismissed as primitive and hostile. The real question was, what would the Nixians learn from this defeat, and how would they adapt for their next attempt? The thaw. 3 days after their initial retreat, the Nixians returned. But this time, they came with a fleet that darkened the Antarctic sky, dozens of their crystalline ships arranged in attack formation. Commander Reynolds stood in the station's command center, watching the massive armada through reinforced windows. They've modified their hulls, Turner noted, studying sensor readings. Some kind of layered shielding. They're trying to compensate for the thermal vulnerabilities we exploited. But look at the energy cost, Patel added, pointing to power fluctuation graphs. They're burning through their reserves just maintaining those shields. They still haven't solved the fundamental problem. Reynolds nodded grimly. The Nixians had returned with brute force, thinking that overwhelming numbers and enhanced shielding would be enough. They still hadn't learned the real lesson of their previous defeat. All stations, battle positions, Reynolds commanded. Initiate Protocol Absolute Zero. The station's crew moved with practiced efficiency, activating the defenses they prepared during the aliens' absence. They had spent every moment since the last battle preparing for this confrontation, using their captured Nixian technology to develop new countermeasures. Incoming transmission, Wilson announced. The command center's holographic projector flickered to life, revealing the image of a Nixian commander, different from their first contact, but bearing the same air of technological superiority. Your resistance has been noted, the alien announced, its translated voice carrying artificial calm. Your exploitation of environmental conditions was impressive. But ultimately futile. We have adapted. Submit now, and your knowledge will be preserved in the collective. Reynolds stepped forward, her expression resolute. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? You think adaptation means adding more layers of technology. We've had millions of years to learn what real adaptation means. She nodded to Turner, who activated their new weapon system, one that married human ingenuity with salvaged Nixian biotechnology. Across the ice field, hundreds of devices powered up, each containing a splice of living metal programmed with a simple but devastating purpose. Your final warning has been rejected, the Nixian commander declared. Commence final protocol. The alien fleet began their attack, but this time, they found no easy targets. The human facility seemed to vanish from their sensors, hidden by a combination of thermal masking and electromagnetic disruption. Instead, their scanners showed thousands of false signatures, each one a potential threat. They're deploying ground forces, Wilson reported. Much larger numbers than before, but... Commander, they're moving differently. More cautiously. They learned something from last time, Reynolds observed. But not enough. Execute primary sequence. The battle that followed would later be known as the Thaw, the day humanity proved that understanding an environment was more powerful than any technology. As the Nixian forces advanced, they encountered not just extreme cold, but precisely controlled temperature variations that played havoc with their enhanced shielding. Their new defenses are failing, Turner reported with satisfaction. The layered shielding actually makes them more vulnerable to our targeted temperature shifts. They're trying to compensate, but... A massive explosion lit up the sky as one of the alien ships lost control of its power systems. The enhanced shielding, designed to protect against cold, had trapped too much heat from their own weapons. The ship's living metal hull began to warp and twist, unable to maintain stability. Now, Reynolds ordered. Launch the biotech disruptors. The devices they had planted across the ice field activated simultaneously, each one containing a small amount of reprogrammed Nixian living metal. The alien technology, modified by Turner's team, reached out to its parent material in the Nixian ships and armor. But instead of seeking connection, it transmitted a cascade of contradictory thermal commands. The effect was catastrophic for the invaders. Their living metal armor, confused by the conflicting signals, began to malfunction on a massive scale. Ships lost power and crashed. Ground forces found their advanced suits turning rigid and unresponsive. Their entire command and control network is collapsing, Patel reported. The modified living metal is spreading through their systems like a virus. The Nixian commander's hologram flickered back to life, but this time, there was no artificial calm in its translated voice. What have you done to our technology? We didn't just study your technology, Reynolds replied. We understood it. You made it an extension of yourselves, but you never considered what that really meant. You became dependent on it, forgot how to truly adapt. We humans never had that luxury. Around them, the remains of the alien fleet were in chaos. Ships were either retreating or crashes, their once mighty armada reduced to scattered remnants by humanity's understanding of their own thermal technology. This world is not marked for integration, the Nixian commander declared, and for the first time, there was something like respect in its artificial voice. Your species' adaptation capabilities exceed our parameters for assimilation. As the surviving alien ships fled Earth's atmosphere, Reynolds turned to her team. Status report. Multiple captured vessels, Commander, Wilson reported. Intact samples of their latest technology. And most importantly, data streams showing their complete tactical analysis of Earth. They'll be back, Turner said quietly. Maybe not the Nixians specifically, but others will come. Earth's extreme environments make us look primitive, but they're actually our greatest defense. Reynolds nodded, watching the Antarctic dawn paint the battlefield in shades of gold and pink. The ice was already beginning to reclaim the wreckage of alien ships, integrating them into the endless white expanse. "Let them come," she said. "Every environment on Earth, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains, has taught us something about survival. We don't just endure these conditions, we learn from them, adapt to them, use them." The station's crew began the process of recovery and analysis, knowing that this victory was just the beginning. Humanity had proven itself against one alien threat, but the galaxy was vast, and Earth's extreme environments had many more lessons to teach. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that had saved humanity. It was their fundamental understanding of their own world, and their ability to turn harsh conditions into advantages. The Nixians had come seeking an easy conquest and found instead a species forged by millions of years of adaptation to Earth's most extreme environments. They had learned, at last, why humans were still here, still thriving, still adapting. And they had learned to fear not humanity's weapons, but their mastery of survival itself.